The United States is currently in an era of mass deportation. It's been crafted over several administrations, and both Democrats and Republicans are responsible for the existence of this draconian and far-reaching machine. As you can tell from this graph, deportation has grown exponentially across several administrations, and by the time President Obama had left office, there had been 3 million deportations during his 8 years in office. And while the first year of the Trump administration has been unable to match that record of the Obama administration, it's clear that the Trump administration is inheriting an already well-tuned machine. And while, yes, we know that the Trump administration is making critical changes, I want to reiterate that this deportation regimen has already been cemented by historical decisions and a larger structural forces, even before this administration. So now I'm going to turn into explaining 4 different mechanisms that have really put the United States on this track of mass detention and mass deportation. The first is the expansion of a definition of what it means to be a criminal. So 2 important laws passed in 1996 that eliminated judicial review. So it no longer allowed for, in some cases of deportation, for immigrants to present their case. Moreover, it expanded the grounds on which non-citizens, including legal permanent residents, could be deported by expanding what aggravated felony means. So while the term aggravated felony might sound scary and violent, the term is actually quite deceiving. Today, that definition covers more than 30 types of offenses, including simple battery, theft, filing a false tax return, and failing to appear in court. The second mechanism that has pushed this forward is the expansion with interior enforcement and local police enforcement. So it's important to note that ICE itself does not have the resources to be patrolling U.S. cities. So it relies on criminal law enforcement to locate people eligible for deportation. And we've seen several reiterations of this in 2008 with Secure Communities, and then in 2014 with the Priority Enforcement Program. And currently, the Trump administration has actually increased its reliance on these agreements. Third, we have the implementation of a bed quota. So in 2009, the detention bed mandate really occurred, and this requires ICE to maintain a minimum number of beds. So really what this translates to is that it must hold a certain number of detainees every day. So no other law enforcement is subjected to a quota for its detainees. Finally, we have limited protections for those that are going through the process of detention and deportation. On the one hand, there are no state-provided lawyers. So this means that any legal assistance that families get for their family member in this process is an out-of-pocket expense. And there's also no specified time for people to leave detention. So really, families are waiting in this limbo until a decision is made. And with the Trump administration, one of the ways in which he has further reduced protections is by eliminating the process of prosecutorial discretion. So in the Obama administration, judges were allowed to have some discretion for those who were not seen as top priorities for deportation. But the Trump administration has virtually eliminated this practice. Next, I want to briefly touch upon who is actually being affected by the policies of interior enforcement. Sociologists Balazs Boza and Andaluz Sotelo have highlighted in a recent article that deportations between 1997 and 2012 have targeted Latino working class men. So as you can see from this graph, most of those deported out of 94, 96, I believe, have been males. And if we look at the countries of citizenship from which those have been affected, it's mostly Latino immigrants. So what has allowed for deportation to become so racialized in gender? Well, when we think about 287G and the power that it has given local law enforcement, and the fact that racial profiling already exists in local law enforcement, it really allows for practices of local law enforcement to increase its impact of racial profiling. So we've seen in cases where 287G is implemented that even routine traffic stops can turn into deportations. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the effects that having this mass system of detention and deportation really does. So first, I'm going to talk about some of the economic implications. Just as I said in the previous slide, detention and deportation is a racialized and gender process, meaning the most common outcome is the removal of an immigrant working class male. And that oftentimes means it's the removal of the father, who often is also the male breadwinner in the home. So sociologist Joanna Derby has termed the phenomenon of suddenly single motherhood to explain what happens to these families when a father is removed. So mothers are sort of suddenly become single mothers, and they're left to scramble for the economic stability of their home. Hence, really what we're seeing is the creation of this underclass of families who are limited in resources when facing this trauma. Second is the psychological implications of detention deportation. There are a number of studies that show the range of mental health and psychological trauma that emerges from these practices, including depression, anxiety, stigma, aggression, insomnia for children. And when we think that these effects are also happening with the remaining behind parent or the remaining behind spouse, really children are facing a loss of one of their parents and then their own parents facing their own trauma. And so it's a limited amount. So it's a very precarious place to be as a child. Third, in terms of social implications, we know that one of the strategies that families use to try to overcome this is by all family members returning back to countries of origin. So at least in Mexico, some scholars estimate that 500,000 U.S. citizen children are currently living there. And other scholars note that the process of integrating U.S. citizen children is made difficult by institutional barriers. So even this strategy has lots of implications for family well-being. And also, detention deportation also, for some families, means the loss of rights over their children. And so one study in 2011 estimated that the number of children in foster care could be around 5,000. Finally, when we think of legal implications, we know that practices of mass detention and deportation really created distrust in immigrant families against legal institutions. And so here in LA, sexual assaults reported dropping at 25% when the Trump administration came to power. So the U.S. legal system is no longer seen as legitimate and is really not a resources for immigrant families, and because of the distress that is being created. Finally, I wanted to briefly share one of my results from my own study. So all my participants often have difficulties in sharing about their experiences. And oftentimes, I'm one of the very first people they talk at length about their father's deportation. And so really all my participants have difficulty sharing about their experience, but those children and spouses whose father had a criminal record have an especially difficult time sharing about their experience. So they carry around the stigma of the criminal record. Some even share that the perception and one of the very first questions that they are asked is what did your father do to get into detention and deportation? And often these words invalidate the experience of feeling that injustice and loss of a father. And these participants also noted that they did not see a model for advocating for detainees with a criminal record. And often the cases that were being championed by organizations around them were really cases where that parent did not have a criminal record. And so sort of to wrap up this presentation, I just want to leave us with the thought and consideration of how we're talking about detention deportation and how that ultimately can affect the ways families understand detention deportation after it happens.